The evening light in Queens fell through thin curtains, painting the bunker living room in a golden fatigue. The air smelled of fried onions, old furniture, and nostalgia, the scent of a house that had seen too much laughter, too many arguments, and too many apologies that came too late. Archie Bunker sat in his chair like a monument that refused to crumble. The television flickered with reruns of better days, and somewhere in the kitchen, Edith's soft humming tried to hold the world together one note at a time. It started with a sound, a snap of a mousetrap, sharp and unfulfilled. Archie cursed under his breath. Even the mouse, it seemed, no longer respected his authority. Then came the knock on the door. Teresa Betancourt entered like a breeze from a different world. Young, brown-skinned, her accent, a melody that made Archie's English sound like a hammer. She was polite, confident, and completely unaware that her mere existence challenged every truth Archie thought he knew. Edith's face lit up. She recognized the nurse from the hospital. "Come in, dear," she said. And just like that, a new era stepped into the Bunker household. To Edith, Teresa was hope-educated, hard-working, independent. To Archie, she was danger-wrapped in politeness. "You're the Puerto Rican girl who told me to shut up," he muttered, suspicion clinging to his voice. His words were meant to wound, but Teresa smiled, not with defiance, but with the quiet assurance of someone who has heard worse and survived. Her laughter filled the room warm and disarming, the kind of laughter that broke tension without asking permission. The dinner that followed was both comedy and anthropology. Teresa cooked pescado, laying the plate in front of Archie with gentle pride. The fish, whole and unflinching, stared at him with glassy eyes. "I don't eat nothing that looks back," Archie said, covering the head with a baked potato, as if to erase the gaze of a world that refused to look away. Edith tried to keep peace, her kindness stretching thin between cultures, generations, and tempers. But as the laughter of misunderstanding filled the room, something almost tender happened. Archie, even in his prejudice, found himself caring. When Teresa mentioned a jealous boyfriend, his fear turned protective. The irony was sharp. The same man who feared difference was willing to defend it when it stood under his roof. When the supposed boyfriend arrived, who turned out to be her brother, Archie's confusion turned into a punch and then unexpectedly into laughter. For a moment, prejudice was defeated, not by reason, but by embarrassment, the most honest teacher of all. Days passed. The mouse escaped again. Life reset itself as it always did until tragedy brushed against comedy like static. One morning, the subway nearly swallowed Mike Stivic alive. The story was absurd, terrifying, and banal all at once. He leaned too far over the platform, slipped, and was pulled up by two strangers just in time. Yet from that accident bloomed a question darker than death: who would raise their baby Joey if they were gone? The conversation unfolded late at night, with rain tapping against the window and Gloria clutching her husband's arm. They weighed names like evidence in a courtroom: friends, relatives, strangers. Edith and Archie came up, of course, but the thought of Archie's temper and stubbornness made Mike shake his head. "You want your father to raise Joey. I wouldn't trust that man to raise a window." His words hung heavy, slicing through Gloria's loyalty and love. Upstairs, the baby slept innocent of the legacy being argued below a child born into a war of values. The next day, Archie arrived at Joey's birthday with a smile that belonged to another century. In his hands, a gift wrapped in red, white, and blue. When the paper tore open, a small machine gun gleamed beneath the light. "From Grandpa," he said proudly, "a man's toy." The silence that followed was the sound of generations colliding. Mike's disbelief, Gloria's disappointment, Edith's helpless kindness, they all surrounded Archie like mirrors, reflecting a man who didn't understand what he'd done wrong. To him, it wasn't violence, it was history. Guns had saved his world once. Why shouldn't they protect his grandsons? When Gloria told him later that they had chosen someone else, a young liberal couple, Al and Trudy, to be Joey's guardians, the world stopped for Archie. His face, carved with years of certainty, cracked. "You mean if you die, you want strangers to raise my grandson?" His voice broke between rage and heartbreak. In that single moment, the man who had survived war, labor, and time was undone by love denied. Edith watched, unable to fix what was never really about the will or the baby. It was about belonging, about being told you were no longer the kind of person the future needed. Archie left in silence. Rain followed him down the street, the kind that made New York smell like metal and regret. Back inside, Mike and Gloria sat together, convincing themselves they had made the right decision. But even righteousness has its cracks. When Gloria revealed that Al Bender had once made a drunken pass at her, Mike's certainty dissolved. Morality, it turned out, was easy in theory and messy in practice. "We'll make an anti-dying pact," Gloria said, through tears and laughter. The absurdity of it all, the fear, the pride, the love, became unbearable. They laughed because the only alternative was crying. Later that night, Edith called from the house across the street. "Archie," she said softly, "they changed their minds. They ain't naming anybody." Archie paused. The rain had stopped. "You mean they think they'll live forever?" he asked, half grinning, half praying. Edith's voice was gentle. "Yeah, that's the idea." For the first time in weeks, Archie laughed. "Well, maybe they will," he said, not believing a word of it. He hung up the phone, stared at Joey's photograph on the table, and for a brief moment, his face softened into something almost holy. Then came the ghosts. Edith met them first at Ferguson's Market between the produce aisle and the lottery counter. Bummy Fensel, she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A name from another life. He was older now, heavier, but his grin was the same. He spoke warmly of old times of school picnics and teenage jokes, and he was married now to Dolores Mancini. Edith smiled, not realizing that the name she had just spoken would open a wound in her husband's memory. When she returned home and told Archie, his fork froze midair. "Who'd he marry?" he asked too quickly. "Dolores Mancini," Edith said again, and the color drained from his face. Dolores, the girl from Hanley Park, the one who had once kissed him in the dugout under the dim lights of youth. In his head, the scene replayed with cinematic clarity. A summer night, the sound of a radio from a distant car, her laughter echoing off the chain-link fence. To Edith, it was a dinner invitation. To Archie, it was a reckoning. That evening, he sat in silence, trying to explain to Mike what he couldn't admit to himself. "She reduced me, Meathead," he said defensively. "I didn't ask for nothing. It was her." Mike laughed, appalled and fascinated at once. "You don't even hear yourself, do you?" But Archie wasn't listening. He was building a wall out of excuses, each brick labeled chromosomes and man's nature. In his mind, guilt was a woman's invention. The truth was simpler and sadder. He couldn't stand the idea that something from his past might make Edith look at him differently. When the Fincels finally arrived, the air was thick with nostalgia and awkwardness. Dolores entered with grace, her perfume faint but intoxicating, carrying with it the scent of every what-if that Archie had buried. Dinner passed with forced laughter and nervous glances. Edith Ever, the gracious host, didn't see the undercurrent not until the dishes were in the sink and Dolores, drying a pan, mentioned the picnic at Hanley Park. The words landed like a quiet confession. "You and Archie?" she said casually. "You took a walk, didn't you?" To the dugout, Edith froze. "Was that Archie?" she asked softly. I don't even remember. Dolores laughed, but Edith did. She remembered everything. When the guests left, the house fell silent except for the ticking clock. Archie tried to act casual, humming an old tune. Edith walked into the room, drying her hands, her voice steady. "I know about the picnic," she said. He turned, startled, his face pale. She didn't accuse. She simply stated it like a fact of weather. "Oh, Edith." He began fumbling for the words that might fix something decades old. "I just want you to know," he said finally, "whatever happened back then, it wasn't about us. You were in Atlantic City." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said, "and what you did before we were married is your business, just like what I did before we were married is mine." For the first time in his life, Archie Bunker was speechless. The man who had an answer for everything could not find a single word. Edith smiled, not cruelly, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had seen the world, forgiven it, and gone on cooking dinner anyway. The moment hung in the air like smoke, delicate and final. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. The world, indifferent and eternal, kept moving. The next week arrived like a sigh, quiet, dull, deceptively ordinary. The curtains were washed, the dishes clinked, the house seemed healed, but beneath the calm lingered a residue of old memories that refused to fade. Archie sat reading his paper while Edith hummed in the kitchen, pretending not to look at him too long. The world outside Queens went on trains, factories, noise, but inside that small brick house, the world was shrinking. Then, as it often happened in the Bunker household, absurdity knocked again. This time it came with a photograph. Barney Hefner, Archie's drinking buddy from Kelsey's bar, came swaggering and waving a picture of his granddaughter. "Ain't she a beaut, Art?" she said proudly. Entered her in the Flushing Tribune Beautiful Baby Contest. The words hung in the air like bait, and Archie, never one to back down from competition, bit hard. He scoffed at the photo, pretending not to care. "She looks like a baked potato with eyes," he muttered, but the seed had been planted. Pride, that old disease of men like him, began to bloom again. That night he pulled out Joey's baby photos from a shoebox. The living room was dim, the light from the television flickering across his face. "Now that's a baby," he whispered to himself, holding the picture up as if it were a medal. "Look at that jaw-strong American." The irony, of course, was lost on him. In his world, love always came dressed as ownership. To love Joey meant to prove Joey was better than someone else's child. Edith watched him quietly from the kitchen doorway, her eyes soft with both affection and fatigue. "Archie, don't do it," she said. "Mike and Gloria won't like you entering him without asking." But Archie only grunted. "They'll thank me when he wins." The next morning he mailed the form. No ceremony, no guilt, just conviction, the kind that comes from mistaking pride for purpose. He even forged a few extra votes, clipping newspaper coupons and filling them out with the names of dead neighbors. "Cheating's only cheating when you lose," he said, half to Edith, half to himself. She didn't argue. She just stared at him with that mixture of sadness and admiration that had become her language of love. A few days later, Mike and Gloria found out. The explosion was biblical. "You can't just use our baby for your ego trip," Gloria yelled. Archie flushed, an indignant shot back. "My ego trip? I'm trying to make the kid a winner." Mike stepped in, his voice trembling between logic and rage. "You're teaching him the wrong values. Archie winning isn't everything." Archie laughed bitterly, says the guy who never won nothing in his life. For a moment, it wasn't about the contest anymore. It was about two Americas staring at each other across a generational trench. One built on competition and survival, the other on ideals and equality. Both convinced the other was blind. But comedy, like life, has a way of turning tragedy into routine. Days later, the newspaper announced the finalists. Joey's name was printed in bold, and the living room erupted in chaotic joy. Edith clapped her hands in delight, Archie puffed his chest, and even Mike smirked despite himself. For one brief, fragile evening, they were united, not by understanding, but by pride. Edith cut the article out and taped it to the refrigerator. "Ain't he handsome?" she said softly, her eyes glimmering. "Yeah," Archie replied, pretending not to choke up. "Takes after his grandpa." But the celebration didn't last. When the judges visited the finalists' homes, Archie turned the event into a campaign rally. He staged the house like a political commercial. Flags, polished shoes, rehearsed smiles. He coached Edith on what to say, told her to sound normal, and warned her not to mention Puerto Ricans, liberals, or unions. "Just act American," he said, as though that were something that could be acted. When the judges finally left unimpressed and slightly amused, Archie's hope began to crumble. The next day's paper revealed the winner, Barney Hefner's granddaughter, Little Linda. Archie stared at the headline, silent. His pride collapsed into a bitter chuckle. "Figures," he said quietly, "they fixed it." Edith came to him, slowly holding a plate of cookies, her voice gentle but firm. "Archie," she said, "maybe Joey don't have to be the most beautiful baby in the paper. He's beautiful to us. That's enough." He looked up at her eyes, glinting in the half-light. "Yeah," he whispered, "but the paper don't print that." The line hung heavy, a lament for a man who only knew how to measure love in trophies. That night, as the neighborhood slept, Archie sat alone in his chair. The living room lamp cast a soft halo around him, his face half-shadowed, half-glowing. The sounds of distant city life, sirens, trains, laughter floated through the window like ghosts. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Joey's picture, and stared at it for a long time. There was no music, no applause. Just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator. His lips moved quietly. "That's my boy," he said, and for the first time it didn't sound like a boast. It sounded like a prayer. Outside, the world was changing faster than he could follow. The factories were closing, the rent was rising, the neighbors spoke new languages. The news spoke of civil rights, feminism, and equal pay, words that made Archie squint as if they were written in code. He didn't hate the future, he just didn't recognize it. And yet, in his own way, he was part of it. Every argument he had with Mike, every misunderstanding with Teresa, every quiet forgiveness from Edith, they were all part of America learning awkwardly, painfully to talk to itself. By the season's end, the bunker's living room had become something mythic. a theater of contradiction where laughter covered heartbreak and ignorance disguised love. Teresa had moved on, carrying with her a small piece of Edith's kindness. Mike and Gloria had gone upstairs, still convinced they were building a better world. And Archie, left alone in his armchair, hummed a few bars of Those Were the Days, the song that had followed him through the years. Only this time, it sounded different. Slower, sadder, like a man realizing that those days weren't better, they were simply his. The camera panned back slowly, the light dimming around him. The house looked smaller now, but somehow warmer, filled with echoes of laughter, anger, and love that refused to die. Edith entered quietly from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just looked at him with the same patience that had carried them through every storm. Archie looked up, met her eyes, and for once, didn't argue. The silence between them said everything: forgiveness, fatigue, and something like peace. The screen faded to black, the music swelled softly, and the credits rolled. The audience laughed one last time, though no joke had been told. It was the laughter of recognition, the uneasy sound of a nation seeing itself flaws and all and daring to care anyway. Archie Bunker wasn't the hero of that story. He wasn't even its villain. He was the mirror, cracked and dirty, but honest enough to show what everyone else tried to hide. And in that fading light, that golden hour between past and future America lingered, arguing, laughing, forgiving, still trying after all these years to learn how to live in the same house,